Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. The Stormont executive agrees an anti-poverty strategy after 18 years. We'll ask the chair of the Communities Committee what he wants to see in the document. The Education Minister Paul Givan angers teachers with proposals that could see penalties for staff who refuse to cooperate with school inspection. We'll hear live from a teaching union leader. Plus, a Northerner could well run for the Irish presidency, but there'll be nobody from this part of the island voting in the election. We'll ask a leading Irish government TD if and when that might change. And here with his thoughts on what we're discussing, the political commentator, Mark Davenport. Last Thursday, the executive approved an anti-poverty strategy 18 years after the commitment was first made to do so. We haven't had sight of the document yet, but the Communities Minister, Gordon Lyons, told reporters ministers have been working together to get something that works. But how ambitious is it? The First Minister has already said it could probably go further. Her party colleague, Colm Gildernew, chairs Stormont's Communities Committee, and he joins me now from his constituency. Welcome to the programme. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. So we've waited 18 years. Is any strategy, frankly, better than no strategy at this stage?
Well, good morning, Mark. I suppose this strategy has been on the desk of Gordon Lyons, the Minister, for quite some time. In fact, since he came back in February. So it's important to understand this is a draft strategy. This will now go out to consultation, and that's a key part of the process. Whenever Deirdre Hargey initiated this progress, she put in place a co-design group, a group of people who were experts by experience, experts by lived experience, and also by in terms of their own professional roles. So it's very important that the work of that group is realised in the strategy that we see.
I just wonder what insight you have had as far as the scope of the strategy is concerned at this stage. I mean, does it alarm you that your colleague, the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, seems to be suggesting it's not the plan it could be? After consultation, it could perhaps be developed further. That doesn't suggest it's going to be the all-embracing document that some people clearly would like it to be after 18 years.
Well, we do know that there was a substantial draft on the minister's desk when he came back into post. That draft was developed working with a range of bodies who actually know what the issues are and what the solutions are. So what's crucial now is that the minister listen to those voices now. The consultation process the minister, regrettably, and the committee has expressed its regret in relation to this, regrettably, the minister has decided at an earlier point to disengage from that co-design group. However, it's important that he takes their guidance on board, that he takes their recommendations on board, that they are part of this process, because they are the people who know what the strategy needs to contain to make a difference. And that is, in the final analysis, how the strategy will be judged on the impact that strategy has on poverty here. That's what we'll all be looking for.
Yeah, well, obviously the Minister isn't with us on the programme today. No doubt he will talk about the strategy when it is finally fully in the public domain. But presumably, if he was here, he would say he's the first evolved Minister who's actually managed to get approval for a strategy. Do you give him credit for that?
Well, I certainly give credit for the fact that we're now seeing a draft come forward for consultation. However, until we see what that draft is, it's impossible to give a verdict. The Communities Committee did ask repeatedly that we would have sight of this draft. However, that didn't happen.
So is your concern that it might not be as all-embracing as you and others who are particularly concerned about this issue might want it to be? So the Minister has got it agreed, and it hasn't been agreed for nearly 2 decades. So finally we've got something to look at, or will have very soon something to look at. But are you worried it could be a pared-back version of what you would like it to be?
Well, the Minister has referred at different times to substantial redraft and to refining. So it remains to be seen what that means. What we do know is that there was a lot of work put into this, and that work was by people who knew what they were talking about. I have to say I had some concerns about the Minister's remarks around providing people with the tools to get themselves out of poverty, because to me it's important that we recognise that the causes of poverty are systemic, they're structural, they're often intergenerational. So a strategy must address all of those issues.
Interesting line from the Deputy First Minister, Emma Little-Pengelly, who is, of course, the Minister's party colleague. Let me just quote what she said. The draft anti-poverty strategy will address the real-life impacts of poverty. It will ensure that we can prioritise actions and funding in the right way, at the right time, to the right people, to help those who need it most. So she's saying it can do the job it's being set up to do. Are you buoyed up by that comment?
Well, I wait to see the detail, as I think many within the sector and many here in society will await to see the detail.
Yeah. So how will you judge it when it finally arrives on your desk? What are you looking for specifically? Can you talk us through that? Will it get the thumbs up from you if it has a clear set of targets and strategies that can be examined and can be actually ticked off in future? Is that what you need to see?
Well, that would certainly be an important part of it. We also need to see an implementation plan, and we need to see how the lines of accountability will run, given this is an executive strategy and all departments would be involved. It's important that we see how that's going to be managed.
Yeah, and the Minister, of course, we're going to see it tomorrow. The Minister's made it clear that it will be accompanied by an action plan which will be ready to go. So you'd imagine that's the kind of quantitative evaluation that you'd be looking for. That should be part of it.
Well, that's certainly, yes, and that's what the sector have been looking for, those targets, those clear outcomes and an implementation plan.
And there are those within the sector who have talked about their nervousness about what it might not include rather than what it might include. Do you think that they're right to have those reservations at this stage?
Well, I think given the co-design group, and let's bear in mind, the co-design group included bodies like Barnardo's, Rural Action Network, the Children's Commissioner, who we spoke to just on Thursday last, AGNA. So bearing in mind that those people have been set outside the process for some time now, I think it's very understandable that they would be concerned as to why that might be the case. They weren't consulted in advance of this draft being presented to the executive, and I think that is a substantial reason why they are concerned as to what this document contains at this stage.
OK, well, we'll find out. We'll be able to fill in quite a few of the blanks, hopefully, over the next 24 hours. We'll leave it there for now. Colm Gildernew, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today. Now, new proposals announced by the Department of Education last week could see teachers being fined up to £2,500 for not taking part in school inspections. The Minister, Paul Givan, has launched a consultation on the plan, but teachers' unions aren't happy. I'm joined by Jackie White, General Secretary of the Ulster Teachers' Union. Thank you for joining us. Let me just ask you, first of all, did you know the Minister was going to publish this on Thursday?
No, sorry, Mark. We didn't know that it was coming out on Thursday. We knew that there had been some discussion around it in the background, but actually we thought we were on a different path. The industrial action that had taken place over the last number of months had been based on two particular things, one being the workload. And the workload was the biggest issue for the teachers, but a lot of that workload came from the previous ETI regime. Okay, so we have, and I must commend the ETI actually for the work that they have done to develop a new process for inspection, and that process is just starting to become embedded and introduced into the system. But connected to that is an awful lot of workload that came from the old regime. And we now, through this latest pay settlement, have got time-bound. We're going to move forward in terms of we have an independent review of the workload, and then we have timeframes for delivery, for very short-term timeframes for delivery for some of that workload. So we thought that what we were doing was moving down a path where we were re-establishing the teaching profession, re-establishing the trust between the teaching profession and the department, and re-establishing what the Minister wants actually in Transform Ed NI, which is an attractive profession to bring people in. This then landed in the middle of it, which actually vilifies the profession and actually makes the teachers feel that the two messages are working against each other.
There is an argument, of course, isn't there, that teachers don't have anything to worry about here, because you have been taking part in industrial action that's meant you've been refusing to cooperate with inspections. But that is now over and done with. There's a new regime being brought on board, which you've just said you think is a pretty positive one. So if the Minister moves to act on what he's suggesting he wants to do, if we've got a new system in place, there's no reason for you to be refusing to cooperate with inspections in future anyway. So it's an entirely academic threat.
It is an entirely academic threat, but then the other side of that argument is that we don't need that threat, because whilst we have got the stability within the profession, whilst we have got ETI processes and inspection processes that are fair, then we actually we don't need to be taking the action. And we had made that point to the Minister, the fact that if we have, how we get industrial stability within the profession is whenever the department are delivering on their promises and we have got a fair process taking place in order for teachers to be accountable. So we don't actually need that additional threat over the top as long as all parties deliver on what it is that we have agreed to deliver on.
Of course, who knows what might happen in future. Industrial relations can change over the months and over the years. The department says the move, and just to be clear, it would make it an offence to obstruct an inspection and it would carry a fine of up to £2,500, simply brings Northern Ireland into line with the rest of the UK. What's wrong with that? Well,
the thing is that the education system in Northern Ireland, it's not the same as the rest of the UK. Every different jurisdiction within the UK has got its own education system, as we have discovered over. I mean, we, for example, work more teaching hours than anywhere else in the UK. We have differences here in the UK, but I think the important thing is that there has been this huge breakdown of trust, and I think that we really need to get ourselves into a position where there is professional trust on both sides, and from that point of view, we are prepared to be accountable. We are happy to be accountable. We know that that's part of the job.
This would make teachers accountable. This would make teachers accountable, yes, in line with teachers elsewhere in the United Kingdom. You're saying there should be no potential sanctions against teachers here. You should be allowed to do whatever you want.
No, I'm absolutely not saying that, and I would think that teachers would take offence at that, because right the way through all of this, we have ensured that we have been delivering the best for our children. Why we have taken the action is in order to create that space, get rid of unnecessary workload and create the space to give exactly that to the children. So what we are saying is that whilst all parties deliver on what they have agreed, there is absolutely no need at this moment for this threat. And what we would like is for the Minister to allow us to move into that space, to create that industrial stability, that everybody's delivering, create the trust and create that attractive profession. And we don't need this threat hanging over our heads at this time.
Well, you've talked about trust. The Minister says inspections, and I'll quote him, provide independent assessments of the quality of education and contribute to school improvement by identifying areas where schools need to enhance their provision. The absence of inspection over the past decade means many schools may not have been identified to receive the support they need to improve. So he's saying the refusal to cooperate with inspections in the past is detrimental to the interests of children, and he's standing up for them.
Now, there are a number of factors in that. Firstly, the previous ETI regime that we had was not a regime that was supportive and that was delivering in order to improve things for children. Another element is that the Minister has also said that the absence of inspections has said that we cannot guarantee the safety of children, and that was actually fundamentally untrue, because we always had safeguarding of, schools were always inspected in terms of safeguarding even during industrial action. So, we need a supportive process. We have that now in place. We should allow that now to embed before and allow teachers to build the trust in that before we start.
You keep using the word trust, so let me just ask you to be absolutely clear. Final question to you. If the Minister continues with this, and if he doesn't take it off the table, are you saying that trust has gone?
The difficulty is that we're in a position where the trust has broken down already. We were seeing the next 6 months as being a period of time that we could start to rebuild that trust. This is only serving to stop that in its tracks.
OK, so this, from your view, this is going to make things worse, not better?
Yes, absolutely.
So you want a rethink on the part of the Minister?
Yes, please.
And if that doesn't happen?
Well, look, the Minister is entitled to move forward with the legislation. We will be raising all of these issues. We will be discussing this over the coming weeks and see at least whether the Minister will create the space to at least put a hold on this and delay this until after we've moved things through for the next 6 months, and then see what we feel about it at that stage.
All right, OK. Well, very interesting to hear your thoughts. We'll see what happens. Thanks very much indeed, Jackie White, for coming in to join us. Now, let's get some analysis of what we've been hearing so far in the programme from the political commentator Mark Devonport, who's been listening to what we've been discussing. With two big stories, I suppose, and people might look at them and say, well, these are examples of evidence, if we need it, that the executive is delivering. Do you see it that way?
Well, certainly in relation to getting an anti-poverty strategy together, I think most people would think that that's a good thing. But this is against the backdrop of them having faced a lot of delay, 18 years, and also having faced judicial challenges, which seem to have almost brought the ministers kicking and screaming to this point. So the big question will be what's in the strategy and does it deliver? And we had, for instance, already a child poverty strategy in place, which I think ran out in May 2022. And quite recently, there were reports from the Audit Office and the Public Accounts Committee saying that they didn't think that that had basically delivered very much. So all of this talk is for the birds if it doesn't actually do something to bring down the level of poverty out there.
Yeah, so you could end up with a strategy after 18 years, and you might say, well done to the Minister for delivering that. But if it's too bland to make any real difference to people who are actually dealing with the issue of poverty, then what's the point? Some people might wonder.
Exactly. It's just a lot of documentation, a lot of sort of goals and not necessarily targets that don't necessarily add up to much. It was curious listening to Colin Gildennew there, who talked about the work done by the Sinn Féin Minister in this regard, Deirdre Hargey, but said that he didn't know what was going to be in this new strategy that's being brought forward. Now, when Deirdre Hargey was the Minister, she had an expert group of people who specialise in poverty matters, and they actually recommended to her that we should have a Scottish-style child payment, which at the moment, I think, runs in Scotland at about £27 per week for each child in families where they're getting benefits. So is that the kind of thing Sinn Féin would like to see? Is that the kind of thing that might be missing from whatever Gordon Lyons brings forward? Clearly, it will make a difference in practice, but then it potentially leads to disparities, particularly around the sort of cut-off point as to who's eligible for that payment and who's not, and has the executive got the funds? Well,
that's a challenge for one DUP minister. Another DUP minister in the eye of a potential storm is the Education Minister, Paul Givan. It sounds like he could potentially be on a collision course with teachers?
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that they've sort of qualified this. They've just got this deal now in terms of workload and in terms of their conditions. It seems a bit strange that this has then been sort of tacked on. We'll have to see what the other party's attitude to this is. He's bringing it into line with the rest of the UK. I understand there are some similar regulations south of the border, so maybe nationalists will go along with it. But if it's legislation, he will require cross-community support, so he can't do it as a solo run.
OK, another one to keep an eye on. Interesting stuff, Mark. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you a little bit later in the programme. Now, the race to succeed Michael D Higgins as President of Ireland hasn't officially started just yet, but we do know that when it does, the electorate will be limited to those eligible voters who live in the Republic. Despite years of campaigning for the franchise to be extended to citizens north of the border, that still hasn't happened and won't happen by this November. But could it happen by 2032, the scheduled date of the next election? Let's ask the Fine Gael TD Frank Feehan, who's his party's new spokesperson on Northern Ireland and UK relations. Welcome to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Mr Feehan, just how far could this go potentially in terms of people not living in the Republic's jurisdiction being allowed to take part in Irish presidential elections, do you think?
Well, a lot of work was done by previous governments and on this issue, including the provision of draft legislation. And however, the government is currently reflecting on this issue. And it's true to say that the franchise will not be extended to residents of Northern Ireland. But I think there certainly will be a role for this new electoral commission, which was only set up 2 years ago and actually delivered the first boundary change for the last general election only 6 months ago. And I'm sure that'll be an issue for some. But I know this is an issue for some people living in Northern Ireland in particular. And I think that there will be a focus on this government, but we are currently reflecting on the matter.
Some citizens in Northern Ireland who would want to vote in that presidential election might say that if your party had lived up to a commitment that it made in the programme for government back in 2016 to hold a referendum on extending the franchise at presidential elections to Irish citizens living outside the state, and that would obviously include Northern Ireland, we wouldn't be where we are today because the matter would have been resolved. You any sympathy for that view?
I don't disagree with that view. On the 11th of June 2019, the government did authorise the drafting a 39th amendment to the Constitution, which is effectively the presidential election bill. However, the government can do a lot of things at once, but not everything at once. And the last government faced a lot of challenges, and COVID, cost of living crisis, the housing emergency that continues, and also a Ukraine-Russia war. So there was a lot of other issues that we had to deal with, and the government will reflect on this very, very important issue.
Yeah, and the current Taoiseach, Micheál Martin from Fianna Fáil, has confirmed he believes that it would take a referendum for this change to come into effect. How do you think it would work in practical terms? I mean, would it be limited to potential voters from Northern Ireland, or would you like to see the Irish diaspora across the United Kingdom, across Europe, North America, for example, being allowed to vote as well? And if that happened, how would they vote? Where would they vote?
Yeah, I think the logistics are huge. I would like to personally see the Irish diaspora, we have nearly, and people holding Irish passports, that they would have a certain say in the provision of and the election of the President of Ireland. But, again, we have a new electoral commission. This is the first in the history of the state, and they certainly will look at all these aspects. And, it's at the moment it's not a priority for this government, but we'll continue to reflect on it. But it is an issue that will be addressed, and our main priorities are public services, housing, and health, and many other aspects around the issues that face us as a country, as a nation, and indeed geopolitical.
Do you think it will be addressed for the 2032 election, or do you think you and I could be having a conversation similar to this one in 2033?
I'm not sure. It's not in the commitment of this government, but I certainly feel that it is an issue that is burning, and it's an issue that will be addressed in the future, maybe. But I simply don't know. But then referendums are an unusual thing. We're very used to them here in the Republic. We've had 28, 29 referendums in the space of 30 years, and referendums certainly are never a foregone conclusion. But my preference would be that the Irish diaspora people in the island of Ireland and would have a say. And I think that will be reflected on in the coming years and coming months.
OK, there are some people in the Republic who would say be careful what you wish for, because those citizens living in the Republic have the ultimate say as to who the President of Ireland is as things stand. If you extend the electorate, it could be that outside forces are able to shape the decision-making process in the future. I mean, for example, there could be several hundred thousand Sinn Féin votes here in Northern Ireland that would have a very large bearing on the outcome of a future presidential election. We know Sinn Féin hasn't done particularly well in recent presidential elections, but if this change was to come into place, then Sinn Féin could have a very big influence in future. How would you feel about that?
Look, I don't think we should be presumptuous as at people's voting intentions in any election, particularly in a presidential election where people vote on issues that can be completely different from a general election. So, I certainly wouldn't be too concerned about that.
And what about the votes of a big block of Northern Protestant/Unionists who might decide to vote tactically in a presidential election in future? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, well, interesting times ahead.
That's a very good way of wishing that question away. Just finally, Frank Fain, I want to ask you about you are your party's representative for UK relations, as I said in the introduction. What are you expecting from tomorrow's reset, much anticipated reset between the UK and the EU?
Well, this is the first summit since Brexit, and it's all been Ireland's consistent position that we want to see the closest possible ties between the UK and the EU, and the EU is the lead negotiator for our country, and we'll engage actively with the EU institutions and member states and to ensure our interests are understood. And I think this is very, very positive, and we look forward to it.
OK, well, we look forward to finding out what the details are in due course. Frank Feehan, appreciate your time today. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, let's get a final word with Mark. Just to pick up on the presidential election and how that might change, the electorate for that might change in future. I mean, there have been promises that this is going to happen for many years. Do you still see a will to make that happen?
I think there's a will to get there eventually. The question will be, what's the timescale? It is a bit of an absurdity that you get northern candidates, be it Dana or Martin McGuinness, standing. You've got Mary McAleese, who stood and was the president, and yet her next-door neighbour couldn't have necessarily voted for her. So on that sort of broad principle, you can see why this will probably happen at some stage. But the devil will be in the detail. How do they create an electoral register for this? Is it just Irish citizens? Do they take the register as exists here, which would include also British citizens? Would unionists participate? Probably not if they had to go to the trouble of getting an Irish passport.
Yeah, and the question again raised by some unionists is to what extent any change like that might be outside the terms of the Good Friday Agreement and might be divisive in Northern Ireland. Now, there are those who simply say that's not the case, but unionists mention that when they're asked about it.
Yeah, there has been this argument that it's some kind of a land grab and goes against the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. I think the nationalists and the Irish government will say, look, this is far more limited than that, and will say, you know, this is simply allowing people to, if you like, express their national aspirations through choosing a symbolic leader.
Just want to ask you finally on that UK-EU reset tomorrow that I talked to Frank Feehan about very briefly at the end of our conversation. The EU Relations Minister, Nick Thomas-Symonds, has said his objectives for tomorrow's development are jobs, lower household bills and stronger borders. What do you think we're going to see?
Well, the most interesting thing I think he said is that he believes it will cut red tape in terms of food imports and exports. And really, we're looking very closely to see if there's any closer alignment between the UK as a whole and the EU. It may cut down on the need for checks in terms of the Irish Sea border. I think that'll be the biggest change for us. There's also talk about a youth mobility scheme, but I think we've already got our bespoke youth mobility scheme in as much as young people here can get Irish passports and then go and travel and work in the EU. So I think maybe the trade aspect of it, which might not be fully delivered this week but might emerge in the months to come, will be the thing that we'll be looking at most closely for making a practical change here.
Yeah, he also talked about it easing passport controls. But, I mean, for some people that's an issue. For other people, depending on what passport they have, it's not an issue.
Quite good for me because my family goes one way when we're on holiday and I go the other way. And so I quite like to go quickly through that queue in order to be able to use those e-gates. OK, got to leave it there. Mark, thanks very much indeed. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. That's all we've got time for today. Just before we go, quick reminder about this week's Red Lines podcast, which we recorded at the Balmoral Show. It's available on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to catch up on this programme or any of our politics programmes and podcasts, you can now find all of them in one place. Just go to bbc.co.uk/newsni or the BBC News app and scroll down to find them all together. I'll be back with a view on Thursday night on BBC One at the usual time. For now, though, from everyone in the team, have a good day. Bye-bye.